Prince William just said it. Something did happen with Rose Hanbury. And now, everything the palace tried to bury is spilling out. For years, whispers echoed through royal corridors and headlines, an alleged affair between the future king and the Marchioness of Cholmondeley, Rose Hanbury. The palace never commented. William never flinched. Until now. In a moment no one expected, Prince William has finally broken his silence, admitting, in his own words, that it wasn't just idle gossip. It wasn't nothing. Something real happened. What exactly did he reveal? Why now? And what does this mean for his marriage to Kate Middleton, the monarchy's image, and the royal succession? From private dinners to a crumbling friendship, to a resurfaced photo the royals hoped you'd never see, this is the unraveling of a secret Buckingham wanted buried forever. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if the future King of England just admitted to the one rumor that Buckingham Palace spent years trying to bury? What if the whispers, the carefully ignored blog posts, the sudden disappearances from royal social circles, all pointed to a truth so damning that the entire foundation of the model royal marriage between Prince William and Kate Middleton cracked beneath its polished surface? Now, after years of silence, indirect denials, and meticulously staged family portraits, Prince William himself has finally broken the silence. And his words have only added fuel to the fire. It wasn't just a rumor. Something did happen. These 7 words have ignited a storm across the globe, reshaping the public's understanding of the man once touted as the responsible, stable heir, the steady hand meant to restore the monarchy's image in a post-Diana, post-Megxit era. But this scandal has done more than just spark gossip. It has exposed fractures within the House of Windsor that many suspected, but few dared to confront publicly. And at the heart of it all lies Rose Hanbury, a name that once sat quietly within the aristocracy but now dominates headlines, tabloids, and internet forums alike. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about power, image, legacy, and the price of silence in an institution built on public perception. For years, William's alleged affair was an open secret, discussed behind closed doors, hinted at in vague social media posts, and aggressively scrubbed from mainstream press. But the world has changed. Leaks cannot be controlled like they once were. Whispers turn into viral posts. And even a prince is no longer immune to scrutiny. Let's set the stage. In the early months of 2019, a curious series of events unfolded. Rose Hanbury, once a close friend of the Duchess of Cambridge and a regular fixture in the couple's social circle, was suddenly cast out. Reports emerged that Kate Middleton had instructed William to phase her out. The media initially labeled it a simple rural rivalry, a petty social spat between women. But behind that benign phrase, the internet began to speculate and dig deeper. Theories emerged. Was there more than just tension? Had Rose overstepped a boundary no one was supposed to mention? The royal family responded with silence and then with legal threats. British outlets were allegedly warned not to publish certain rumors. Even well-connected royal reporters dodged the topic in public. That alone told readers everything they needed to know. The palace only threatens legal action when something gets too close to a dangerous truth. But speculation didn't die. It evolved. Forums like Reddit and Twitter lit up with analysis. Kate and William's body language was dissected during royal appearances. Every cold glance, every stiff smile, every trip they didn't take together became part of a growing narrative. The golden couple of the monarchy was hiding something, and that something had a name. Despite the silence, Rose Hanbury's absence spoke volumes. Once seated just feet from the Cambridges at formal events, she disappeared from public royal functions. Her social media footprint all but vanished. Her family retreated from the spotlight. And Kate, ever the image of composure, seemed to carry on as if nothing had changed. But those who paid close attention noticed something was different. Still, it remained a rumor. A dirty little secret the British press refused to touch. And for a while, it looked like it would remain that way until now. In a twist that no one expected, Prince William has reportedly acknowledged what many have long suspected. According to a leaked private conversation, verified by multiple sources close to the royal circle, William didn't offer an elaborate denial or an emotional justification. He didn't deny the connection. He simply said, it wasn't just a rumor, something did happen. That one sentence has shifted the entire landscape. No longer are we dealing with allegations or third-party claims. We are now confronting an admission, veiled, indirect, but powerful. For a man trained from childhood to speak only in rehearsed statements and carefully managed appearances, This moment of candor, whether intentional or not, changes everything. The implications are enormous. If William did indeed have an affair, and now essentially admits to it, what does that mean for his relationship with Kate? For the royal image they have so carefully cultivated? For the monarchy's future? Remember, William is not just a celebrity. He is the heir to the British throne. His actions are scrutinized not just for gossip, but for what they mean in a broader national, even global context. The royal family's legitimacy hinges on perception. And this scandal shatters the illusion of perfect unity they've tried so desperately to sell. This video will unravel every thread of this complex and explosive story. We'll walk you through the timeline of events that brought us here, from the first whispers in 2019 to the recent revelations in 2025. You'll learn who Rose Hanbury really is, what her history with William and Kate entails, and why her name has become both a symbol of scandal and a tool of media censorship. We'll examine how the palace maneuvered behind the scenes to kill the story before it grew legs, and how their silence may have only amplified suspicion. We'll look at how the British public has responded, from loyal monarchists to furious Republicans, all asking the same question. How much of the royal image is real, and how much is fabrication? Most importantly, we'll try to understand the man behind the title. Who is Prince William, really? Is he the responsible heir the public has been told to trust? The stable force meant to lead the monarchy into a new era? Or is he simply the latest royal to fall into a pattern of betrayal, secrecy, and manipulation? As the story unfolds, prepare for twists you didn't expect, for sources who break their silence, and for details that were never meant to reach the public eye. By the end of this video, you won't just know what happened, you'll understand how it happened, why it matters, and what it means for the future of the British crown. This isn't just another royal scandal. This is a reckoning. And it starts now. To truly understand how a single whispered name could unravel the carefully polished image of Prince William and the royal family, we must begin in the spring of 2019. The United Kingdom was still grappling with political uncertainty surrounding Brexit. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had just welcomed baby Archie. Prince Andrew's scandal hadn't yet exploded into full public view. But within the polished gates of Norfolk's aristocratic enclave, a quieter crisis was brewing, one that would simmer beneath the surface before eventually boiling over. It began not with a tabloid front page or a breaking news headline, but with silence. The kind of heavy, deliberate silence that royal watchers, journalists, and insiders recognized as calculated, a silence that says more than any official statement ever could. At the heart of the story was a woman, Rose Hanbury, Marchioness of Cholmondeley. Once a close friend of Kate Middleton and a regular guest within the intimate circles of aristocratic Norfolk society, her sudden absence was glaring. Once photographed laughing beside Kate at formal events and garden parties, Rose's public appearances alongside the Duchess all but ceased. Then came the first report, buried in a relatively obscure publication, that Kate had allegedly told Prince William to phase Rose out of their social circle. Initially dismissed as social gossip, the phrase rural rivalry appeared in headlines, downplaying the situation as a petty tiff between two well-to-do women over unimportant matters. But those who followed royal dynamics closely knew better. These events don't leak by accident. And Kate Middleton, known for her discretion and avoidance of media controversy, doesn't cut ties without reason. So why Rose? And why now? In the weeks that followed, a flurry of online speculation began. Internet forums, anonymous Twitter accounts, and royal gossip blogs dug into the details. Timelines were analyzed. Photos were compared. Public appearances were dissected. Suddenly, it wasn't just about a social snub. It was about something deeper, a betrayal. And one name continued to rise, Rose Hanbury. Blogs began insinuating an affair. A source close to a tabloid hinted that Prince William had grown too close to Rose during a period of personal strain between him and Kate. There were no direct quotes, no photos, just smoke, but enough to suggest a fire somewhere out of view. And the reaction from Kensington Palace made things worse. Rather than ignore the growing chatter, royal representatives allegedly reached out to the British press behind the scenes. Editors were warned. Legal action was quietly threatened. Headlines were pulled. Comments were deleted. The stories didn't make the front pages, not because they lacked traction, but because they were too dangerous. The Crown was not about to let a repeat of the Charles-Camilla Diana scandal play out in the digital age. But this aggressive suppression had the opposite effect. In a world governed by digital breadcrumbs and algorithmic exposure, censorship became a catalyst. The rumor became more believable because the palace tried to silence it. The British public, long trained to read between the lines of royal behavior, knew the playbook too well. If a story disappears overnight, it usually means it hit a nerve. And the internet wasn't about to let this one go. Reddit threads titled "The William and Rose Affair" gained thousands of comments. Twitter users began posting side-by-side images of William and Rose at formal events, speculating about body language and subtle gestures. Rumors swirled about late-night visits, secret parties, and an incident that led Kate to draw a firm line. Even major journalists began to allude to the story without naming names. One veteran royal reporter tweeted that a particular story is being heavily suppressed behind the scenes, not for lack of evidence, but because of who it involves. The message was clear. This wasn't tabloid trash. This was something that hit the very heart of the royal future. The story also had another complicating factor: the setting. William and Kate's primary residence at the time was Amer Hall, a country estate in Norfolk gifted to them by Queen Elizabeth II. It was their escape from London, their sanctuary. It was also where the Cholmondeleys lived nearby. The Cholmondeleys' own estate, Houghton Hall, is less than 4 miles away. In royal and aristocratic terms, that is next door. In this quiet, secluded corner of Britain, where privacy is valued above all, William and Rose were said to have spent increasing amounts of time in the same social functions: dinners, balls, art events. These gatherings weren't covered by the press. They didn't take place under paparazzi lenses. But they were noticed. People whispered. One reported turning point came during a lavish dinner party at Houghton Hall. Accounts vary, but some claim that Kate was noticeably absent while William and Rose spent what sources described as an unusually long amount of time deep in conversation, away from the main crowd. This detail, though never officially confirmed, spread rapidly online, turning a theory into near belief for many royal watchers. As the months rolled on, William and Kate appeared together in public with the same grace and unity that had always defined their image. But something was different. Observers noted the stiffness, the occasional flash of tension, the colder expressions behind their practiced smiles. Kate, known for her composure, was described by body language experts as deeply controlled but distant. And William, typically jovial, began to appear more serious and occasionally withdrawn. By mid-2019, the rumors had reached a tipping point. The name Rose Hanbury became a code phrase among royal commentators. It was the secret everyone knew but no one could print. A well-known gossip columnist even joked in an interview, "If I even mention her name, my editor threatens to cut the segment." That statement alone was a confession. The story was too hot, too close to the throne. Still, even with this growing tension, nothing was officially said. And that's what made the rumor so powerful. It lived in the margins, just out of reach, yet undeniably present. It shaped the way people viewed William and Kate, even if they couldn't put their finger on why. And it laid the groundwork for something that would later come back, years later, with devastating clarity. Because once a story enters the public consciousness, it doesn't just disappear. It waits. It evolves. It gains weight with time. And in the case of William and Rose Hanbury, it gains something even more powerful: belief. When Prince William finally uttered the words, it wasn't just a rumor. Something did happen. The public didn't respond with shock. They responded with a kind of grim confirmation, as if to say, "We always knew. We were just waiting for you to admit it." This chapter of the story, the origin of the rumor, isn't just a prelude. It's the foundation. Without understanding the delicate web of social proximity, aristocratic privilege, media censorship, and institutional silence, the revelation would be just another headline. But with this context, it becomes something else, the first fracture in the crown's carefully guarded facade. And as you'll see in the next section, the woman at the center of that fracture, Rose Hanbury, was never just a rumor. She was a reality the palace never wanted to face. To truly grasp the impact of Prince William's alleged affair, we must take a close and unfiltered look at the woman who stands at the center of it all, Rose Hanbury. She is not just a footnote in royal gossip columns or an incidental name whispered in scandal. She is a figure of substantial lineage, striking presence, and aristocratic power, the kind of person whose existence alone demands quiet attention within elite British society. But Rose's story is not just about her connection to the royal family. It is also about who she is, what she represents, and how her history made her uniquely situated to walk into William's orbit. and change everything. Born in 1984, Rose Hanbury grew up in the rarefied world of British nobility. Her full name is Sarah Rose Hanbury, and her bloodline traces back to some of the country's most prominent families. She is the daughter of Timothy Hanbury, a wealthy website designer, and Emma Longman, a fashion designer and former model who was once close to Princess Diana's circle. But the connection to the royal family goes even deeper. Rose's maternal grandmother was Lady Elizabeth Lamart, a bridesmaid at Queen Elizabeth II's wedding to Prince Philip in 1947. This small but significant detail embedded Rose's family deep into the royal web long before she ever became a headline. From birth, she was born into a world of country estates, private clubs, and rules not spoken out loud, but deeply understood by those within it. These were the people who lived near royalty, socialized with them, and knew how to remain in the inner circle without ever challenging it. After a private education, Rose briefly worked as a fashion model, represented by Storm Model Management, the same agency that discovered Kate Moss. Her tall frame, poised demeanor, and aristocratic cheekbones made her a natural fit for the camera, though she never chased celebrity. For Rose, modeling was a brief chapter, not the story. She soon transitioned to work in politics as a researcher for Conservative Party MP Michael Gove, further blending beauty with brains in a way that made her both intriguing and well-connected. But her trajectory shifted dramatically in 2009 when, at age 25, she married David Rock Savage, the 7th Marquess of Cholmondeley. He was 23 years her senior, a reserved and extremely wealthy aristocrat with ties to both film production and royal service. The marriage cemented Rose's title as the Marchioness of Cholmondeley, and with it came the sprawling Houghton Hall, an 18th-century Palladian mansion with more than 1,000 acres of manicured land and some of the most valuable private art collections in the UK. Houghton Hall is not just a home, it is a statement of power, culture, and lineage. Situated in Norfolk, it placed the Cholmondeleys squarely in the same elite social circle as William and Kate, who lived just a few miles away at Anmer Hall. In a region where social proximity often means more than political alliances, the closeness of these two homes made casual encounters, dinner parties, and shared events not just possible, but inevitable. It is here, in Norfolk's so-called turnip-top aristocracy, that Rose's relationship with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge truly began. For years, the three were known to socialize regularly. Rose and Kate were often photographed at charity galas and art exhibitions. The Hanbury-Cholmondeley household was viewed as part of the Cambridge's tight-knit circle. Their children reportedly played together. The two families shared not only geography, but also lifestyle, tradition, and expectations. At the time, there was no reason to suspect anything more than friendship. In public, Rose maintained an elegant but reserved presence. She was not a tabloid fixture. She gave no interviews. Her social media presence, if any, was tightly guarded. She was the ideal aristocrat, stylish, silent, and stately. And that silence may have been her most strategic asset. But for those within the upper echelons of society, Rose was not just a background figure. She was known for her charm, intellect, and a level of quiet confidence that made her compelling. She was someone you noticed in a room, not for being loud or flamboyant, but because she carried herself like someone who knew exactly who she was, and who she didn't have to prove anything to. That kind of woman, in the presence of a man like Prince William, whose own life had long been defined by duty, routine, and carefully choreographed appearances, could be magnetic. There is no confirmed timeline of when Rose and William's alleged connection deepened. No smoking gun. No scandalous photo. And perhaps that's what makes the rumor so powerful. It thrives in the absence of hard evidence, fueled instead by behavior, absences, whispers, and one woman's sudden exclusion from a royal circle she had long been part of. In early 2019, as previously explored, Rose was abruptly phased out of the Cambridge's social life. This language, so cold, so deliberate, suggested more than just a disagreement or a falling out. Something had changed, and not just in Rose's status, but in the palace's attitude toward her. Reports began surfacing that Kate had allegedly demanded Rose's removal from their social life, sparking headlines speculating on the source of the sudden rift. Was it jealousy? Betrayal? Protective instinct? What followed was silence from Rose, a silence so profound it became deafening. She made no statements, issued no denials, and simply retreated. She continued attending selective society events but avoided the spotlight. Her public appearances dwindled. Her name became a loaded whisper in aristocratic circles. And yet, she did not fade away completely. Some insiders speculate that her marriage to the Marquis was affected by the scandal. Others believe it strengthened, bound together by the necessity of damage control. Still, others suggest that Rose used the attention to step back from royal proximity, understanding that any further appearances might only worsen the storm. Whatever the reason, her exit was too clean, many thought. What makes Rose Hanbury such a potent figure in this unfolding drama is not that she's a stereotypical temptress or an opportunist looking for fame. Quite the opposite. Her power lies in her restraint. In a world where even minor royals court attention, Rose has done everything but. She hasn't tried to capitalize on the headlines. She hasn't courted press interviews or offered her side of the story. And in doing so, she has remained enigmatic, a ghost at the feast, present in memory, absent in flesh. But even ghosts leave traces. Rose's name is now embedded in royal lore, alongside Camilla and Diana, Sarah Ferguson, and Wallis Simpson. Yet unlike these women, Rose never gave the press a moment to twist, never confirmed or denied, never gave a single tearful interview or angry retort. That silence, whether strategic or personal, has only deepened her myth. She is, in many ways, the perfect scandal figure, a woman of pedigree, beauty, poise, and silence. A woman who could blend into the tapestry of British aristocracy while still shaking its foundation from within. A woman who may have once stood beside the future queen and ended up, if rumors are true, sleeping with the future king. And now, with Prince William's recent alleged admission that something did happen, Rose Hanbury's place in royal history is no longer speculative. It is unavoidable. She is no longer just a supporting character in a tabloid fantasy. She is a defining element in the story of William and Kate, a story that, for years, the palace tried to control. But as the next chapters will reveal, some stories cannot be buried. Not forever. Not when they threaten the very foundation of the crown. From the outside, the marriage of Prince William and Kate Middleton has always appeared to be the monarchy's shining example of stability. Where Prince Charles and Princess Diana's relationship fell apart under the heat of public scrutiny and betrayal, William and Kate seemed to present the opposite, calm, collected, and committed to duty. Their romance, which began in the halls of St. Andrews University, survived a breakup, weathered media pressure, and emerged as a fairy tale marriage complete with 3 children, a lavish wedding, and near-universal adoration. But every fairy tale, especially those written under the weight of centuries-old tradition and endless public attention, has its shadow. And behind the polished veneer of the Cambridge's perfect life, cracks have long existed, small at first, barely visible, but growing under pressure. The allegations surrounding Rose Hanbury didn't just threaten William's reputation, they tested the very core of a marriage that had, until then, withstood every storm the crown could throw at it. The tension first became publicly noticeable not in dramatic confrontations or shouting matches, but in body language. Those who follow the royals closely understand the significance of subtle cues. The space between two people as they walk, the absence or presence of hand-holding, the stiffness of a smile, or the slight shift in posture during formal events. And in the months following the surfacing of the Rose rumors in 2019, royal watchers noticed something. William and Kate were out of sync. In photos from public events during that period, the warmth that had characterized their joint appearances seemed to cool. There were fewer candid smiles, fewer affectionate glances, and a noticeable increase in controlled, mechanical movements. Kate, who typically radiated ease in front of cameras, began to appear more guarded. William, too, seemed distant, his usual confidence replaced with a slightly strained seriousness. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to be felt by those who had studied their dynamic for years. Behind closed doors, according to palace insiders, things were worse. While there has never been an official confirmation, several sources have indicated that Kate was devastated by the rumors, not just by the idea of infidelity, but by the proximity of the betrayal. This wasn't some unknown woman from outside their world. It was Rose, someone Kate had shared dinners with, laughed with, trusted. The betrayal, if true, wasn't just about William. It was a double-edged wound inflicted by 2 people she had once counted among her closest companions. Those who have known Kate over the years describe her as fiercely loyal, cautious, and deeply private. She doesn't seek confrontation, but she also doesn't easily forgive. And when Rose was quietly removed from the social circle, it wasn't a mere suggestion. According to several unconfirmed but widely reported accounts, Kate gave William a direct ultimatum: Rose goes, or we go. Whether or not it was phrased exactly that way is unclear, but the message was unmistakable. Rose's presence was no longer acceptable. That demand itself speaks volumes. In a marriage built on royal tradition, duty, and image management, personal decisions are often sacrificed for the greater good. The fact that Kate insisted on distancing from Rose, and that it was done with noticeable urgency, points to the seriousness of the internal rupture. It also marks one of the rare moments in modern royal history where a spouse not born into royalty took the reins, even quietly, and drew a hard line within the institution. William's reaction to this demand is less well documented, but telling nonetheless. He complied. Rose was removed. Publicly, at least. But insiders suggest that the emotional fallout behind the scenes was complex. William, who has always juggled the conflicting roles of prince, husband, father, and heir, was reportedly torn. On one hand, he knew what was at stake: the trust of his wife, the stability of his family, and the public image he had worked so hard to cultivate. On the other, there were rumors of emotional ties to Rose that were not easily severed. Some accounts even claim that the alleged affair, if it did happen, wasn't simply physical. There were reports of long conversations, shared concerns, a meeting of minds that sometimes grows in the emptiness created by rigid royal life. These claims remain unconfirmed, but they add a layer of emotional complexity to the story. Affairs built on secrecy and forbidden desire are destructive enough. But affairs rooted in emotional connection, in the slow, quiet intimacy of shared understanding, can be even more threatening to a marriage. Kate, despite the hurt, understood her role. In public, she remained graceful. She continued her duties without falter. But those closest to her say she was changed. Not in a theatrical way, but in the quiet shifts that only those paying close attention could detect. She became more focused on her children. Her smiles became more curated. Her wardrobe more purposeful, sending visual messages through color and form. There were no outbursts, no public breakdowns. But there was resolve. A clear boundary had been drawn. And for William, the path forward was equally complicated. As the future king, any scandal involving infidelity doesn't just reflect poorly on him. It echoes through the history of the crown. The shadows of his father's betrayal of Diana still loom large. The monarchy barely survived the fallout from that era. A second generation of royal infidelity could be catastrophic, especially at a time when public trust in the institution is more fragile than ever. To repair the damage, the Cambridges leaned into their public roles. They increased joint appearances. They smiled more. They put their children in the spotlight. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis became symbols of continuity and innocence. But even that had its limits. The public, though largely forgiving, was not blind. Speculation continued. Every gesture was re-examined. Every glance between William and Kate was scrutinized. Were they pretending? Were they truly healed? Or were they merely performing their parts for the sake of the institution? By late 2020, the rumors had quieted somewhat. The pandemic helped, forcing the royal family to operate under restricted public conditions. Zoom calls replaced red carpet events. Family photos were released in carefully timed intervals. And for a time, it seemed the storm had passed. But internally, the damage had not fully healed. Sources close to the couple say that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, even more so in a marriage that has lived under constant observation. Counseling was reportedly considered. There were talks of temporary separation. Nothing was confirmed. But the fact that these possibilities were even whispered speaks to the seriousness of the strain. And now, in 2025, William's own words have reopened the wound. His quiet confession, "Something did happen," has dragged the past back into the spotlight. For Kate, the fallout isn't just emotional. It's political. Every headline about the alleged affair is a direct challenge to her image as the dignified, loyal future queen. Every whisper revives the pain of betrayal, not just from her husband, but from a woman she once called a friend. The marriage endures. Publicly, they remain united. But behind the palace walls, the question remains, at what cost? Because a marriage under this kind of pressure doesn't simply break all at once. It stretches, bends, hardens, and sometimes hollows out. And the most dangerous fractures are often the ones no one can see, not even the couple themselves, until it's too late. As we continue, we will explore the events that unfolded behind those closed doors, the encounters, whispers, and silence that carried this scandal from a rural rumor into a royal crisis. The public only ever sees the surface when it comes to the lives of the royals, a stage carefully lit, with players costumed in tradition, smiling through rituals, and rehearsing the same lines that have been spoken for generations. But behind the closed doors of royal estates, far from the public gaze, the real stories unfold. In the case of Prince William and Rose Hanbury, much of the story remains shrouded in shadows. Yet what has emerged from behind those walls, through whispers, off-the-record admissions, and scattered digital breadcrumbs, has painted a picture of connection, secrecy, and a breaking point the palace never wanted exposed. Amer Hall, William and Kate's residence in Norfolk, is not just a home. It is a fortress of controlled privacy. Gifted to the couple by Queen Elizabeth II after their marriage, the estate quickly became a haven for the young family. It offered a retreat from the public glare of London, a place where George, Charlotte, and Louis could play in the gardens without being photographed, where William could decompress from royal duty, and where Kate could build her identity as both a duchess and a mother. But it was also the place where their lives intersected most intimately with their Norfolk neighbors, among them, the Cholmleys of Houghton Hall. The closeness of their two homes, just a few miles apart, meant that dinners, social events, and shared outings were not occasional luxuries but regular occurrences. Rose and David Cholmondeley were more than just acquaintances. They were part of the same rarefied world, landed aristocracy with old money, deep family roots, and a finely honed understanding of discretion. It was this discretion that likely allowed what happened next to remain a secret for so long. Accounts vary, but several sources, including a former staff member who later spoke to an anonymous gossip blog, suggest that the real shift began during a spring garden party at Houghton Hall in 2018. The event, like many in their circle, was meant to be informal and relaxed. No press, no photographers, just the local elite, enjoying champagne under the open sky. But it was at this particular gathering that the mood reportedly changed. William, usually charismatic but guarded in private settings, was described as unusually engaged with Rose throughout the evening. Multiple guests noted how the two seemed locked in long, uninterrupted conversations, often drifting away from the main group. One attendee, speaking under strict anonymity, claimed that Kate seemed aware of it and not particularly pleased. She maintained her composure, as always, but the tension was said to be palpable. In the weeks that followed, more interactions occurred. A private luncheon here. A museum charity event there. Always under the radar. Always informal, but always noticed by someone. Staff at both Houghton and Amer Hall reportedly began whispering about the frequency of Rose's visits, particularly when Kate was away with the children. These were not tabloid rumors, but the kind of quiet chatter that spreads through kitchens, hallways, and stables in Britain's grand estates. What made these encounters different from casual socializing was not what was seen, but what was implied. William had known plenty of attractive, titled women in his life. He had grown up surrounded by them. But there was something different about Rose. Perhaps it was her confidence. Perhaps her familiarity with the royal world, having grown up within it. Or perhaps, as some suggested, it was the comfort of being with someone who wasn't dazzled by royalty, someone who understood it, even criticized it privately. Some insiders say the relationship, whatever form it took, provided an escape for William. Amer Hall was beautiful, but it was also a gilded cage. The pressures of being next in line to the throne, the weight of public expectation, the constant scrutiny, these were burdens William had carried for most of his life. Rose, by contrast, offered familiarity without pressure. She didn't need him to be Prince William. She needed no favors. Her status was already secured. Their worldviews, backgrounds, and social rhythms were eerily aligned. As the alleged relationship deepened, so did the cover-up. Staff members were reportedly told not to speak of certain visits. Routes between Houghton and Amer were taken at specific times, using back entrances to avoid attention. Communication, according to one former staffer's claims, was discreet but frequent, facilitated by mutual friends or intermediaries. One such individual, a longtime aristocratic friend of both William and David Cholmondeley, was rumored to have played a key role in keeping the two households at ease. Reassuring David, smoothing over scheduling, and making sure no events overlapped too conspicuously. But no secret in the royal family stays buried forever. By early 2019, Kate had begun asking questions, not in public, not to the media, but within her inner circle. Those close to her say that she began to withdraw slightly from shared social events, citing the need for family time. At the same time, she began increasing her solo engagements. Some believe this was a sign of her rising profile within the monarchy. Others suspected it was something more personal, a decision to reclaim her identity and focus on her children amid mounting personal strain. The breaking point came, according to one insider, during a weekend retreat hosted by mutual friends. Both couples were invited. Both were expected to attend. But when Kate learned that Rose would be there, she reportedly declined and told William in no uncertain terms that she would no longer share social space with the Marchioness. What happened during that weekend remains unclear. But shortly afterward, the now infamous phrase entered the press. Kate had instructed William to phase out Rose. That phrase, clinical, sharp, and cold, may have been carefully chosen to convey distance without drama. But its meaning was clear. Kate was done pretending. The friendship was over. The boundaries had been crossed, and the lines were being redrawn. William's reaction to this moment has been the subject of intense speculation. Did he deny anything inappropriate had happened? Did he argue? Or did he simply accept the consequences of a situation that had already spiraled out of control? No one outside their most trusted circle knows. But what followed was swift. Rose disappeared from the public narrative. Her social invitations dwindled. Her name, once mentioned in charity programs and guest lists, quietly vanished. And still, the palace said nothing. No denials. No clarifications. Just silence. This silence was strategic. The royal family has learned, often the hard way, that direct engagement with scandal only inflames it. The logic is simple. If they ignore it, it will go away. But this time, that didn't work. The internet was not so easily silenced. Speculation became certainty in the minds of many. In Rose's absence, her conspicuous silence only added to the fire. Throughout 2020 and 2021, both couples maintained their public roles. William and Kate continued their royal duties. David and Rose kept a low profile, focusing on family and the management of Houghton Hall. But the strain behind closed doors continued. Trust, once eroded, is difficult to rebuild. And when one of the parties is heir to the British throne, rebuilding in privacy is nearly impossible. By 2023, the chatter had died down until it resurfaced again with new momentum. A former royal employee, no longer bound by confidentiality due to retirement, hinted in a podcast interview that the worst-kept secret at the time wasn't about Harry and Meghan. It was about Norfolk. Everyone knew. Everyone saw the shift. That statement, vague but cutting, reignited public interest. The podcast went viral. The rumors resurfaced. Then, in 2025, the shift became seismic. Prince William, reportedly during a private conversation with a close confidant, admitted that something did happen. No details. No elaboration. Just those 4 words. But they were enough. Enough to validate years of speculation. Enough to turn a rumor into a reality. What exactly happened behind those closed doors may never be fully known. But the consequences are now irreversible. The dynamic between William and Kate has changed. The public's perception of the Cambridges has shifted. And Rose Hanbury, once a quiet, poised aristocrat in the background, now stands as a permanent figure in the modern history of royal scandal. As we move forward, we'll explore how this secret didn't just remain hidden. It was forcibly buried by the institution itself. And the press blackout that followed may tell us even more about what really happened and why it had to be kept from view. When powerful people want to make a story disappear, they don't deny it outright. They don't hold press conferences or call emergency meetings. Instead, they quietly activate a network of influence, pressure, and strategic silence. The British royal family has used this approach for decades, if not centuries. And in the case of Prince William and Rose Hanbury, the decision to suppress the affair rumor wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, calculated, and ruthless. The British press is often perceived as a beast with a mind of its own, invasive, relentless, unafraid. But the reality is more complex. Behind the screaming tabloid headlines and intrusive paparazzi shots lies a long-standing, often unspoken agreement between the monarchy and the media. It's a balancing act. The royals grant access, offer photos, provide interviews on their terms. In return, the press occasionally looks the other way when things get too close to scandal, especially if the monarchy believes national stability, institutional respect, or political relationships might be at risk. The arrangement is unofficial but widely understood. And in 2019, when the first hints of William's alleged affair with Rose began surfacing, this old pact was reactivated with full force. It started with the disappearance of headlines. Initially, the affair rumor circulated quietly through online blogs, Twitter threads, and a handful of gossip columns. Most mainstream outlets ignored it, not because they didn't know, but because they were warned. Several journalists have since come forward, off the record, to confirm that there was immense pressure from Kensington Palace to avoid publishing or referencing the story. Legal threats were reportedly issued. Lawyers acting on behalf of the royals were said to have contacted editors directly, reminding them of defamation laws and the potential consequences of repeating baseless allegations. The language used in these communications was careful. It wasn't an outright denial. It was a firm warning. The story is false, unsubstantiated, and harmful. Publishing it could result in immediate legal action. For British outlets operating in a strict legal environment where libel laws are unforgiving, the risk wasn't worth it. They backed off. Stories were pulled. Scheduled columns were quietly shelved. And just like that, the scandal went dark. But while British media went silent, the internet did not. In the United States, Canada, Australia, and elsewhere, foreign outlets began picking up the story. They didn't have the same legal restrictions or the same obligations to the crown. American gossip magazines, international entertainment websites, and global YouTube channels started publishing speculative pieces, analyzing William's body language, Rose's sudden absence from public events, and Kate's visible discomfort in photos. The contrast was jarring. In Britain, the story didn't exist. On the global internet, it was everywhere. This created a phenomenon that media analysts now refer to as the digital Streisand effect, where an attempt to suppress information only increases its visibility. The more the palace worked to block the story at home, the more it spread abroad. The more journalists were told not to speak, the louder the public started asking why. In forums like Reddit, royal-themed subgroups exploded with activity. On Twitter, threads detailing the timeline of the alleged affair went viral. On YouTube, creators with hundreds of thousands of followers dissected every public appearance by William and Kate, pointing out tension, awkwardness, and inconsistencies. The censorship only added credibility to the rumors. It sent a clear message to the public. There's something here, something big enough to scare them into silence. This wasn't the first time the royals had employed media control. In the 1990s, Prince Charles's affair with Camilla was hidden for years despite overwhelming signs. In the early 2000s, Prince Harry's controversial antics were routinely sanitized by the British press. And even more recently, Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein was quietly downplayed until it became impossible to ignore. The pattern is consistent. Deny nothing, confirm nothing, but control everything. In the case of William and Rose, however, something had changed. This wasn't a story that could be locked down by a few phone calls and a legal warning. Social media had dismantled the traditional power structures. The public no longer waited for newspapers to break stories. They didn't need official confirmations to form their opinions. In this new world, influence had shifted. The palace was no longer just dealing with editors. They were dealing with millions of digital investigators, conspiracy theorists, body language experts, and casual observers, all working in real time to piece together the truth. This was a turning point for royal media strategy. The old tools weren't working, and yet, the palace remained committed to suppression. It doubled down on the blackout. Royal reporters who dared to mention the story, even vaguely, found themselves iced out. They lost access to events. They stopped receiving advance press releases. One veteran reporter, who had built a career covering the royals, admitted anonymously that touching the William Rose story would have meant professional exile. Even within internal palace staff, the atmosphere reportedly grew tense. Employees were instructed to avoid discussing unconfirmed narratives related to Norfolk. Communication became heavily filtered. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Kate, insiders say, adopted a more assertive presence within the household, ensuring that no further contact with Rose occurred, at least in public or formal capacity. Meanwhile, the public narrative was being curated with precision. William and Kate were photographed in affectionate poses, often with their children. Intimate moments of parenting were shared in official videos. The couple was seen cooking together, gardening, reading bedtime stories to George. Every image was designed to say the same thing. This is a strong marriage. This is a happy family. Ignore the noise. But the noise was getting louder. The more they smiled, the more people speculated. The public is not naive. They understand that image and reality often diverge, especially within institutions built on spectacle. And for a growing number of royal followers, the suppression itself became the story. One example highlights the extent of the blackout. In mid-2019, an op-ed in a major London paper briefly referenced the affair in passing. It was published online at 7:12 a.m. and pulled by 8:04 a.m. No explanation was given. The author's byline was removed from future royal stories. The cached version of the article was circulated widely online, and within hours, it had been screenshotted and shared across multiple platforms. Another article in an international outlet was allegedly blocked from being cited by British broadcasters. Television networks were told to avoid even mentioning the controversy during panel discussions, even when overseas journalists brought it up. In one segment, a royal commentator on a US-based show asked a British counterpart, on air, "Can you explain why no one in the UK is talking about the William and Rose story?" The British commentator responded with a tight smile and changed the subject. The blackout, in effect, became its own form of confession. You don't suppress smoke unless you fear the fire. By late 2020, some royal commentators began openly criticizing the strategy, not because they confirmed the affair, but because they recognized the damage being done by the silence. One respected journalist wrote that the monarchy no longer controls the narrative, and its refusal to address emerging stories risks losing the trust it still commands. Others warned that if William did ascend to the throne with this cloud still hanging over him, it could tarnish not only his image but the future of the institution. Even some supporters of the crown began to question the approach. Was protecting William worth undermining press freedom? Was it ethical for the royal family to use legal threats to silence speculation? These were questions not easily answered, and certainly not by the palace, which remained locked in its stance of dignified silence. But silence, in the digital age, is noise. And by 2025, when William allegedly admitted in private that something did happen, the blackout collapsed. Not in a grand, headline-making confession. Not in a press release. But in the simple power of confirmation, indirect, vague, but real. The wall of denial, so carefully constructed for years, cracked with a single phrase. The press, though still cautious, began referencing the story more openly. Reporters asked more pointed questions. Op-eds called for transparency, and public trust, already fragile, became even more brittle. The blackout had failed, not because it wasn't enforced effectively, but because in a world of open information, controlling the narrative is no longer about hiding the story. It's about shaping it. And in refusing to speak, the palace let others tell it for them. As we move forward, we explore what this all means, not just for the public image of Prince William, but for the deeply held beliefs about the role of royalty in modern Britain. The scandal may have been hidden for years, but now that it's out, it demands answers. After years of whispers, speculation, and institutional silence, the dam finally cracked. The moment wasn't theatrical. It didn't come during a press conference or a candid interview. Instead, it arrived quietly, almost invisibly, yet with seismic impact. Prince William, speaking in what was presumed to be a private conversation, reportedly uttered the words that validated what many had long suspected. It wasn't just a rumor. Something did happen. 7 words. That's all it took. 7 words to unmake years of public relations, to confirm volumes of speculation, to reduce the carefully sculpted image of the ideal royal marriage to something fallible and human. These words, when first leaked, spread like wildfire across digital platforms. And although no official transcript or recording was released, the reliability of the source and the detail surrounding the leak left little room for doubt. William had, in effect, confessed. The phrase was not shouted, nor published in a letter. It was shared in confidence, according to insiders, during an emotionally charged moment between William and a long-trusted friend. This friend, disillusioned by the years of cover-up and disturbed by the lengths to which the palace had gone to suppress the truth, eventually broke ranks. Their reasoning, reportedly, was simple. People deserve to know that even future kings are not immune to mistakes, temptations, and the consequences of deceit. So what exactly did William mean by something did happen? Was it an admission of a full-fledged affair? A momentary lapse? An inappropriate closeness that crossed emotional boundaries but never became physical? These questions remain unresolved, largely because the phrase itself is deliberately vague. But perhaps that vagueness is the most damning part. In the realm of royal communications, where every word is vetted, reviewed, and measured, even a loosely phrased statement becomes a revelation. The leak, when it reached the public, came through an anonymous source quoted by an independent journalist with a track record of royal scoops. The journalist, initially skeptical, verified the claim through two separate contacts, both of whom had connections to the conversation in question. The consensus among all parties was the same. William had finally acknowledged that the rumors about Rose Hanbury were not entirely baseless. Once published, the story was picked up internationally. Though British media remained cautious in their coverage, several mainstream outlets ran with variations of the headline. Social media, as expected, exploded. Hashtags like #WilliamAffairConfirmed, #SomethingDidHappen, and #RoseAndWilliam began trending globally. TikTok creators made videos reenacting the moment. Instagram was flooded with side-by-side images of William, Kate, and Rose. And YouTube saw a surge of documentaries and commentary videos dissecting the meaning and implications of the revelation. The impact was not just digital. Public trust in the monarchy, already tested by the fallout from Harry and Meghan's departure, began to erode further. Polls conducted in the weeks following the leak showed a noticeable dip in approval ratings for William. Not catastrophic, but enough to signal that the public had taken notice. For the first time in years, the image of the future king was in question. Behind the palace walls, the reaction was described as chaotic. Aides scrambled to assess the damage. PR advisors reportedly drafted potential responses but were overruled by senior officials who insisted on maintaining the strategy of silence. The Queen, though no longer alive at this point, had long instilled in her heirs the principle of never complain, never explain. That principle, however, was beginning to backfire in the era of real-time information. Kate, according to several insiders, was devastated. The leak didn't tell her anything she didn't already suspect or know, but the public validation of her private pain reopened old wounds. For years, she had endured the whispers with grace, preserving the image of a stable, happy marriage for the sake of her children and the crown. Now, all of that had been undone in a single phrase. Friends of the Duchess reportedly described her as humiliated but composed. She did not retreat from public duties. In fact, she appeared more determined than ever to project strength and unity. But those who observed her closely noted a change, not in her appearance, but in her demeanor. More distant, more formal, less inclined toward the spontaneous warmth that had once defined her public presence. William, on the other hand, was described as frustrated, not just by the leak, but by the consequences it brought. According to some, he had hoped that his quiet admission, made in private, would offer some kind of personal catharsis, not public condemnation. But as a public figure, and especially as a future monarch, there is no such thing as a truly private conversation. Everything said is potentially recordable, traceable, and ultimately exposable. Some insiders defended William, insisting that the comment had been taken out of context. Others suggested he had been speaking more generally, not about a specific act of infidelity, but about the closeness to Rose that had been perceived as inappropriate. But most agreed on one point: the comment, however vague, was real. And it changed everything. In the days that followed, palace insiders were said to be in emergency mode. Meetings were held daily. Public appearances were reviewed, altered, or postponed. William and Kate were encouraged to be seen together more often, to reinforce the image of unity. Family outings were scheduled with photographers tipped off in advance. Paparazzi were suddenly granted access to events that had previously been off-limits. It was damage control in its most traditional form. But the public wasn't easily convinced. The narrative had already taken shape. And as always, it was being shaped not by the palace, but by the people. Commentators weighed in from every corner. Royal historians pointed out that this kind of scandal echoed previous betrayals that had haunted the monarchy for decades. Body language experts dissected every photo of William and Kate post-leak, identifying tension, discomfort, and emotional distance. Psychologists discussed the impact of betrayal within high-pressure marriages, particularly those lived out in public view. Feminist columnists argued that Kate had been forced once again into the role of the silent, suffering wife, a role that no modern woman should have to accept. But perhaps the most striking reaction came not from the media, but from the public themselves. Letters to newspapers, comments on social media, and calls to radio shows reflected a nation divided. Some felt sympathy for William, describing him as a man trapped in a cold, mechanical institution who had made a human mistake. Others were less forgiving, calling the entire scandal a betrayal not just of his wife, but of the people who believed in him. In schools, universities, offices, and pubs, the topic became a conversation starter. Everyone had an opinion. Was it really an affair? Was Rose complicit? Did Kate deserve better? Could the monarchy survive another scandal at its highest level? And then there were the questions no one dared to ask in the open, but that simmered beneath the surface. If William had betrayed Kate, what did that say about his fitness to be king? Was the heir to the throne already stained by the very personal failings that had once marred his father's rule? Would the crown, already increasingly symbolic in a modern democracy, lose what little moral authority it had left? As this chapter closed and a new one began, one thing was certain. The phrase "something did happen" would go down as one of the most consequential admissions in modern royal history. Not because of its explicitness, but because of its timing, its implications, and the chain reaction it set off within an institution that has always depended on secrecy. Now that the truth, or at least part of it, had surfaced, the public began asking what came next. Could the monarchy rebuild its image? Could William and Kate repair their bond? And would Rose Hanbury, long relegated to whispers and shadows, ever speak? As we move into the next chapter, we turn our attention to the woman most affected by all of this, Kate Middleton. Her quiet, dignified response to years of speculation may be one of the most restrained acts in royal history. But now, with the silence broken and the truth crawling into the light, her reaction carries weight not just as a wife and mother, but as a future queen. In the months following the leak of Prince William's startling admission, it wasn't just a rumor. Something did happen. The world turned its attention toward Kate Middleton. As the dust settled, the question on everyone's lips wasn't whether the affair was true or not. It was, instead, how would Kate respond? In public, she maintained her usual calm demeanor, composed and dignified as always. But the intense speculation behind the scenes revealed a woman who had suffered in silence for years, forced to navigate a marriage under immense scrutiny, all while shouldering the weight of royal expectations. Kate's response, or lack thereof, would shape the public's perception not just of her, but of the royal family as a whole. It would show whether she was merely a dutiful wife playing her part, or if there was something deeper, more personal, at stake. Kate Middleton had always been seen as the picture of grace. From the moment she entered the public eye, she became the royal sweetheart, poised, elegant, and relatable, a symbol of modern monarchy. Her relationship with William was presented as a fairy tale romance, a love story that had weathered the ups and downs of public life, culminating in marriage and 3 beautiful children. Their bond, it seemed, was unbreakable. But like all fairy tales, there was an underlying darkness, a reality hidden from the public. For Kate, the affair rumors and the subsequent fallout were never just about her husband's alleged infidelity. They were about the emotional toll that comes with being a member of the royal family, a life where nothing is private, nothing is sacred, and nothing is ever truly free from public judgment. In the weeks following the leak, Kate was described by insiders as a woman who had been forced to internalize her pain. She wasn't allowed to speak out, not because she didn't want to, but because the rules of the monarchy prohibited it. She could not be seen to publicly air her personal grievances. That was a luxury reserved for those outside the royal family. But despite her public restraint, Kate's actions spoke volumes. When she did appear in public, there was an almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor. The usual warmth that had defined her interactions with the public seemed more controlled. Her smiles, once genuine and spontaneous, became more measured, as if she were performing for an audience rather than simply enjoying a moment. But this was Kate's style, quiet, understated, yet profoundly effective. She knew how to present herself in a way that kept the narrative in her control, even if she couldn't always control her private life. The public's reaction to her response was mixed. Some praised her for her strength, noting that she seemed to rise above the scandal with dignity. Others, however, criticized her for what they saw as a lack of emotional transparency. It seemed that everyone was waiting for Kate to publicly confront the issue, to speak out about her pain, her hurt, and her betrayal. But Kate remained silent. Her silence was both her strength and her vulnerability. In a world where everything is aired in public, where emotions are laid bare for all to see, Kate's decision to remain composed and private was seen by some as a mark of her inner strength, while others saw it as a deliberate attempt to hide her true feelings. What was she really thinking? What was she feeling? Did she forgive William? Was their marriage still intact? The questions swirled, but Kate never offered answers. And perhaps that was the point. By refusing to play into the media's demand for an emotional response, Kate took back the narrative. She chose when, how, and where to show her emotions. In an era where even a smile can be scrutinized for its authenticity, Kate had mastered the art of control. She had long been praised for her ability to project the image of the dutiful wife, the loving mother, and the perfect royal. But behind that image was a woman who was far more complex, far more layered, than anyone had given her credit for. One of the most telling moments came during a public engagement shortly after the news broke. William and Kate appeared together at an event marking the launch of a new charitable initiative. The cameras flashed, and the world waited for a sign, a hint, a gesture, a word, anything that would indicate how the couple was coping with the scandal. But instead, what the cameras captured was nothing more than a picture of royal composure. William and Kate spoke in unison, smiled for the cameras, and made their way through the event with the same grace they had always shown. There was no confrontation. There was no tearful exchange. There was no public meltdown. And yet, the tension between them was palpable. It wasn't in the words they spoke, but in the silences that surrounded them. Kate's quiet response was a testament to the complex nature of her role as a member of the royal family. She understood that she couldn't simply react to the scandal in a way that would reflect poorly on the institution. She knew that every public appearance, every smile, and every gesture carried weight far beyond her personal emotions. To react in a way that could be seen as dramatic or emotional would have only played into the hands of the media, giving them the power to define her response and her relationship with William. But while Kate maintained her composure in public, the private toll of the scandal was more difficult to hide. Those close to her, including friends and family, reported that Kate had become more withdrawn, more reflective. She spent more time with her children, focusing on their well-being and their stability. She reportedly leaned heavily on her family for support, particularly her mother, Carol Middleton, who had always been a steady presence in Kate's life. Carol's support, along with the presence of her siblings, gave Kate the emotional grounding she needed during what must have been an incredibly difficult time. Kate's decision not to publicly confront the scandal or air her grievances did not mean she was indifferent to the situation. Far from it. But in a world that is constantly watching, Kate knew that her response, or lack thereof, would define her not only as a wife but as a future queen. And that responsibility was not one she could take lightly. Behind closed doors, those who have spoken about Kate's private response say that she was deeply hurt by the betrayal, but she was equally focused on her duty to her family and to the monarchy. Her commitment to her children was unwavering. According to one source close to the couple, Kate often said, "The children are my focus now. I'll put my personal feelings aside for them." She understood that as a mother, her primary role was to protect her children from the fallout of the scandal, to shield them from the public scrutiny that was inevitably coming their way. In the weeks following the leak, Kate was reportedly in regular communication with her advisors, making sure that her public image remained intact. She was, as always, deeply involved in charity work and royal engagements, ensuring that her role within the monarchy continued without disruption. But privately, it was clear that the emotional toll of the scandal had taken its toll. Her ability to maintain the illusion of the perfect royal marriage was, at least for a time, shattered. But she was determined not to let that damage her ability to fulfill her royal duties. In many ways, Kate's quiet response to the scandal reflected the monarchy's broader approach to personal scandals. Don't speak, don't react, and don't give the media the power to dictate the narrative. The royal family has long adhered to the principle of never complain, never explain. And while Kate's decision not to address the affair directly may have been difficult for her on a personal level, it was a clear statement of her understanding of the role she had taken on. The public's reaction to Kate's response was varied. Some praised her for her restraint, for showing the world what true dignity looks like in the face of public scandal. Others, however, criticized her for not showing more vulnerability, for hiding behind the royal facade and refusing to give the public the emotional closure they were seeking. But the truth is, Kate's response wasn't about the public. It was about protecting her family, maintaining her role within the royal family, and preserving her dignity. The months following the leak would reveal more about Kate's resilience. Though she never spoke publicly about the affair, her actions spoke louder than words. And in time, the scandal that had once seemed so damaging to the royal family began to fade into the background.